She tried to kill the Alpha King to avenge her family. "Take her away," the Alpha commanded. The kingdom of Velroth slept under the veil of night, its towering walls bathed in silver moonlight. From the edge of the forest, a figure watched the castle, cloaked in shadows, her eyes sharp and unyielding. Lyria's fingers clenched around the hilt of a dagger, her heart a storm of grief and rage. Every brick, every torchlit window of the Alpha King's fortress reminded her of the life stolen from her. Her family, once proud nobles, were executed for crimes they did not commit, and the man responsible for it all sat somewhere in the high towers, unaware that justice itself was coming for him. Her breath misted in the cold night air as she stepped silently along the forest path. Owls watched her from the branches above, their eyes reflecting the determination burning in her soul. She had trained for this moment her entire life, surviving the harsh wilderness, learning the art of stealth and combat. Tonight she would face the Alpha King himself. Tonight she would make him pay. The castle gates loomed ahead, massive and imposing, yet surprisingly unguarded on this side. Lyria knew the layout from secret maps stolen from her family's old study. She slipped through a narrow side entrance, pressing herself against the stone walls, and moved into the darkness of the inner courtyard. The sound of her footsteps was swallowed by the night, but her pulse thundered in her ears. Kale, the Alpha King, sat in his private chamber high above the courtyard, gazing out at the moonlit gardens. His presence was commanding, his posture perfect, yet there was something inscrutable in his dark eyes. Stories of his cruelty and power were whispered across the kingdom, and yet to those who dared look closer, there was a subtle air of sorrow hidden behind the dominance. Lyria climbed the winding staircase, her movements precise, her mind focused on the dagger she carried. She had imagined this moment countless times, the instant she would plunge the blade into the man who had destroyed her family. Yet, as she reached the top, a strange unease prickled at the edge of her determination. She pushed it aside. Fear would not sway her. The door to Kale's chamber was slightly ajar. She could see the flickering light of a single candle, the shadows dancing across the walls like restless spirits. She stepped forward, every muscle coiled for action. Then she saw him fully. Kale turned, his gaze meeting hers, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to stop. He was more imposing than she had imagined, tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes that pierced through her, seeing not just the surface but the grief and fury beneath. Without a word, she lunged, dagger raised, her scream of vengeance echoing in the chamber. But Catiline moved with a speed that seemed almost unnatural. The blade stopped just inches from his chest, held by his hand, his grip firm but not cruel. "Lyria," he said, his voice low, calm, but filled with authority. "You came for vengeance, yet you are here alone. Do you know what you risk?" She snarled, anger surging. "You killed my family. I will make you pay." Kael did not flinch. Instead, he studied her, as if reading her soul. "And yet, you hesitate. Why?" For a moment, the fire in her eyes wavered. She felt the pull of something she did not understand. A strange mixture of fear and awe, but she shook it off, her hand trembling only slightly as she gripped the dagger. I will not fail," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Kale's expression softened, almost imperceptibly, yet it carried a weight that made her heart clench. "You are brave, perhaps too brave." "Take her away," he commanded quietly, almost to himself. Before she could react, the guards stepped in, their movements swift and precise. Lyria was seized, her struggle fierce but ultimately futile. Her dagger clattered to the stone floor, a cold reminder of the plan she had spent years preparing. She fought with every ounce of strength she had, but there were too many, and Kale's control over the situation was absolute. As she was dragged away, her mind burned with fury. She glared at Kale, expecting hatred to be reflected in his eyes, but instead she saw something unexpected, a calm, a curiosity, and a strange recognition, as if he understood her pain more than anyone else ever could. The dungeon was cold, damp, and dark, a stark contrast to the warm candlelight of Cale's chamber. Chains hung from the walls, and the air smelled of damp stone and something older, something almost alive. Lyria sank to her knees, her body aching, but her spirit still ablaze. She would not cry. She would not surrender. Hours passed, and the silence of the dungeon was broken only by the occasional drip of water and the distant sounds of the castle above. Lyria tried to focus, planning her escape, analyzing the guards' routines, and memorizing the layout of her cell. But no matter how she tried, her thoughts kept drifting back to Cale. The man she had tried to kill. The man who had somehow disarmed her not just physically, but in a way that unsettled her very soul. Late into the night, a faint echo of footsteps reached her ears. She tensed, ready for another confrontation. But the figure that appeared was not a guard. It was Cale himself. He stepped into the torchlight, his presence filling the small cell. "You are still alive," he said, his tone almost gentle, yet commanding. Lyria's eyes narrowed. "Why are you here? To gloat?" Kyle shook his head. "No. I came because I wanted to speak with the one who dared to strike me. You have courage, Lyria, more than I have seen in a long time. And yet, courage can be wasted on vengeance." Her fists clenched. "You took everything from me. My family, my home, my life. I know what you feel. I cannot undo the past, but perhaps, in understanding, we can change the future." "You speak of the future as if you are some wise king. You are a murderer." Cale's expression remained unreadable. "I am a ruler bound by forces you cannot yet comprehend. My cruelty is not born of desire, but of necessity. And yet, I see your pain. I feel the strength of your spirit. You are not like the others who would bow and obey. You are dangerous." Lyria's heart raced. She hated him, she told herself. She hated him with every fiber of her being. Yet there was a strange pull, an undeniable force in his presence that made her pulse quicken, that made her wonder whether the man before her was truly the monster she believed him to be. "Why are you speaking to me like this?" she demanded. "You should hate me. Send me to die." Cale's eyes softened just slightly, but the intensity did not fade. Hate is easy. Understanding is harder. And I have seen understanding in you that few have ever shown me. That is why you are alive. That is why I did not strike you down when you came for me." Lyria turned away, her body trembling with a mixture of rage and confusion. She refused to meet his gaze. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her falter. Yet, deep down, a seed of doubt and curiosity had been planted. Curiosity that would not fade, no matter how much she hated him. The night passed slowly, the hours stretching into an eternity. Lyria could hear the distant echoes of the castle, the faint hum of life continuing above the dungeons. She sat on the cold stone floor, her back against the wall, clutching her knees to her chest. Every moment she spent in that cell, every breath she took, was a reminder of her failure, but also of something new, something she could not yet name. As dawn approached, a shadow fell across the cell doorway. Lyria's heart leapt, her instincts ready for another confrontation. But it was not a guard, nor was it Cale. It was a messenger bearing a small note. The words were simple, written in Cale's precise hand. "You are stronger than you know. Rest, for the trials ahead are greater than tonight." Keku Lyria read the note again and again, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Strength? Trials? The man she had tried to kill had shown her respect, and yet she could not forget her hatred. She clenched her fists, letting the note fall to the floor. She would survive. She would escape, and one day she would make Cale pay, or perhaps discover a truth about him that could change everything she believed. Outside the dungeon, the first rays of sunlight began to touch the castle walls. The kingdom of Velrath awoke, unaware of the storm that had brushed its gates in the dead of night. But within the dark stone walls, a tension had been set in motion, one that neither vengeance nor power alone could undo.
Lyria leaned back against the cold stone, closing her eyes for a brief moment.
The fire of revenge still burned within her, but now it was mixed with something else, a strange, unsettling curiosity, a spark of something forbidden and dangerous. She did not know what the future held, but she knew this: the Alpha King was more than she had imagined, and her journey had only just begun. The echo of Cale's command lingered in her mind. Take her away. She was not ready. But the night had already changed her life forever. And as the dungeon grew quiet once more, Lyria whispered to the darkness, "I will not fail, and I will not forget." The dungeon smelled of damp stone and old shadows. Lyria sat on the cold floor, her back pressed against the wall, her mind restless. Hours had passed since the night she had tried to kill Cale, the Alpha King of Velrath, and yet she could not calm the storm of her thoughts. Anger burned within her, but there was also a strange unease, a pull she could not explain. She had expected hatred, cruelty, and punishment. Instead, Cale had simply watched her, studied her, and then commanded, "Take her away." She did not understand his choice. Why had he spared her life? Why had he not struck her down when she stood ready to kill him? And why, when he spoke, did she feel a flicker of doubt in her hatred? The faint echo of footsteps broke her concentration. Lyria's body tensed. She did not have to look. She already knew who it was. "Still awake," Cale said softly, his voice carrying through the stone corridors. Lyria did not answer. She did not want to give him the satisfaction of seeing her unsettled. Her eyes, however, betrayed her vigilance. He stepped into the dim torchlight, his presence filling the small cell. Even in this cold, dark place, he seemed to carry warmth. Cale leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, watching her. There was a calmness in him that contrasted with the storms inside her. "Why do you come here?" she finally demanded, her voice sharp. "To mock me?" Cale shook his head. "No. I came because I wanted to speak with the one who dared to strike me. You are brave, and yet you are foolish." "Foolish?" Lyria spat. "I am filled with purpose. I am filled with vengeance, and I will not bow to you, Cale." Cale's gaze softened, though his tone remained firm. "Vengeance is a heavy burden, Lyria, but it blinds the heart and poisons the soul. You have strength, yes, but you also carry grief. Grief can guide, or it can destroy. The choice is yours." She clenched her fists. "Do not speak to me of choice. My family was taken from me. My life was destroyed. There is no choice, only justice." Kyle stepped closer, his dark eyes studying her. "Do you believe I do not know grief, that I have not lost?" Lyria's anger faltered for the briefest moment. She did not move, but her breath caught. He seemed human, despite the stories of cruelty that surrounded him. You killed them," she whispered, almost accusingly. "And yet you speak of loss." Cale nodded, slowly. "Yes, I lost more than I can say. The crown I bear is heavy, and the forces that bind me are older than any of us. My cruelty is not for pleasure, but for survival. Yours, theirs, and mine." Lyria looked away, unwilling to believe him, yet unable to dismiss the truth in his words. She had been raised to see Cale as a monster, a tyrant without conscience, but now, in the shadows of this dungeon, she glimpsed something deeper, something hidden beneath the fearsome reputation. "Why tell me this?" she asked, her voice quieter, almost afraid. "Because," Cale said, stepping back slightly, "I see the strength in you, and strength without understanding is dangerous. You are in danger, Lyria, not just from me, but from the forces that surround this kingdom. You have entered a world you cannot yet comprehend." Lyria frowned. "I have entered a world of death and lies. I do not need lessons from you." Kael's gaze did not waver. "Perhaps not. But soon you will have no choice but to learn. There are things at work here, things that threaten all of Velrath. My family, my crown, my people, they are bound by a curse that I cannot break alone." "A curse?" Lyria repeated, curiosity piercing her anger. "What curse?" Kael's expression darkened. "A curse older than the first kings of this land. It binds the royal bloodline, ensuring that power must be wielded with strength. Those who oppose it, those who strike against the king, face consequences they do not understand. The world you see is fragile, Lyria. Your vengeance may be the spark that ignites chaos beyond your imagining."
She shivered, the words settling over her like a heavy fog.
All her life she had trained for this moment, believing that killing Cale would bring justice, closure, and freedom. Yet now she realized that the world was far more complex than she had imagined. Her dagger, once a symbol of power, now felt insignificant against the forces Cale spoke of. "You expect me to trust you?" she asked, her voice trembling, though not from fear alone. Cale shook his head. "No. Trust is not given lightly, but understanding can be the first step." Days passed in the dungeon, each one heavy with silence and reflection. Lyria learned to observe the guards, the routines of the castle, and even the faint magic that lingered in the stone walls. She began to notice small signs, faint patterns in the carvings on the walls, whispers of wind that seemed to speak in voices she could almost understand, and shadows that moved in ways that defied explanation. Each day, Cale visited her briefly, speaking in riddles, testing her patience, and revealing fragments of truth. He spoke of the curse, of the forces beyond the kingdom, and of the sacrifices required to protect Velrath. Lyria listened, her anger simmering but mingling with fascination. She hated him for the past, yet she could not deny the truths he revealed. One evening, as the moon rose high, Cale approached her cell with a lantern in hand. "Tonight," he said, "you will see a part of the world that few ever witness." Lyria glared, but curiosity pricked at her. "Why should I care?" Cale's eyes met hers. "Because this world, as cruel as it is, will demand choices you cannot ignore, and because the path you walk, driven by vengeance, may lead to your own destruction if you do not understand it." He led her through the winding corridors of the castle, past silent guards and ancient tapestries. Finally, they arrived at a hidden balcony overlooking the valley below. The moonlight bathed the land in silver, revealing a forest that seemed alive with shadows. Lyria felt a shiver run down her spine. "The curse touches everything," Cale said softly, his voice almost lost in the wind. "It is not merely a burden for the crown. It is a trial for those who oppose or seek to challenge it. Your family. Their deaths were not simple. They were part of a story far larger than either of us." Lyria's hands clenched, her emotions a tempest. "You speak in riddles." "You expect me to forgive you, to understand." Cale shook his head. "I do not ask for forgiveness. I ask only that you survive long enough to see the truth. That truth may be harder to face than any dagger, any execution. For the first time, Lyria felt the weight of uncertainty press upon her. She had trained for Avenge, but she had never considered the consequences of the forces Cale described. She had never imagined that vengeance could be part of a larger, darker struggle that threatened more than just her heart. Suddenly, the wind shifted, carrying with it a whisper that seemed almost human. Lyria's eyes widened, shadows moved among the trees below, coalescing into forms that should not have existed. She stepped back, her pulse quickening as the unseen force of the curse made itself known. Cale placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and commanding. "Do you understand now? This is the world you have stepped into, and it will not let you leave unchanged." Lyria's fear and anger clashed with a strange, reluctant admiration. The Alpha King, the man she had tried to kill, was her only guide through this darkness, and yet every instinct in her body screamed that he was also part of the danger she had sworn to destroy. The night deepened, and the shadows below seemed to writhe and twist. Lyria turned to Cale, her voice barely a whisper. What are they?" Cale's expression darkened. "The curse is not just words. It is alive. It tests the hearts of those who come near, revealing their true nature. Tonight you see but a fraction of its power. Tomorrow you may see more, and when you do you will need to choose vengeance or survival, hatred or understanding." Lyria sank to her knees, the chill of the night pressing against her. She had entered the castle seeking justice, seeking retribution, seeking a moment of triumph. Instead, she found a man who was both enemy and protector, a force older and more powerful than she had imagined, and a darkness that threatened to swallow everything she knew. She did not know if she would survive the coming days, nor did she know if her heart could withstand the truths Cale would reveal. And yet, even in the face of fear, a spark of something new began to stir, a curiosity, a fascination, and perhaps, though she refused to admit it, a fragile trust. The shadows in the valley below shifted once more, as if responding to her thoughts, to the tension that simmered between her and Cale. The curse had awakened, and Velrath would never be the same again. As Cale left her cell that night, he paused at the doorway, his dark eyes meeting hers one final time. "Rest, Lyria. Tomorrow, the true trial begins. And remember, strength alone will not save you. You must understand, or you will be lost." Lyria watched him go, her mind racing. She clenched her fists, her dagger lying useless on the cold stone floor. Revenge still burned within her, but now it was intertwined with fear, curiosity, and an undeniable pull toward the man she had sworn to destroy. The dungeon was silent once more, but Lyria knew that the world outside was anything but still. The curse was alive. Cale's secrets were dangerous, and her own heart was no longer entirely her own. She whispered into the darkness, "I will not bow. I will not fail, and I will survive, no matter what comes." And somewhere, in the twisting shadows beyond the castle walls, the first stirrings of the curse's true power began to move, waiting for the moment when it would claim its next test. The sun had barely risen over Velrath when the alarm sounded through the castle. Shadows twisted along the walls as soldiers scrambled, torches flickering in the morning wind. Lyria had barely slept. The night had been long, filled with the whispers of the curse and her restless thoughts of Cale. But sleep was no longer possible. The danger had arrived. Cale strode through the hallways with his usual commanding presence. His black cloak trailed behind him like a shadow, and his piercing eyes scanned every corner of the castle. "The curse has awakened fully," he said, voice low but urgent. "The forest has stirred, and creatures bound to it are moving toward the city. We cannot face this from the walls alone." Lyria stood behind the guards, her chains having been loosened for what Kale called necessary cooperation. She clenched her fists at the sight of him, the same man she had tried to kill. His presence unsettled her, yet there was no denying the necessity of working with him. "What do you want from me now?" she asked, voice sharp but tinged with curiosity. Kale did not answer immediately. Instead, he handed her a leather strap holding a simple cloak. "You come with me. There is a path you must walk to understand the power threatening Velrath. I will not lie. You may not survive. But if you do, you will see why vengeance alone cannot save you." Lyria stared at him, torn between anger and the flickering spark of trust she had begun to feel. She wanted to refuse, to walk away, to return to the safety of her cell. But deep down, she knew she would not survive the coming chaos if left behind. She nodded once, sharply, and followed him. The castle gates opened to the forest, the land beyond bathed in early sunlight. But the forest was no longer calm. Shadows moved among the trees like living things, and a cold wind carried whispers she could not understand. Lyria's pulse quickened, and her hand went instinctively to the dagger still strapped to her waist. Kale led her along a narrow path, silent and sure, as if he had walked it countless times before. "The curse is bound to the royal line," he explained. "It protects Velrath, but it also tests anyone who would oppose it. The forest you see is alive with that test. We must reach the heart of the woods and retrieve a relic that can contain the curse's power, at least for a time." Lyria's eyes narrowed.
"And if we fail?"
Kale's jaw tightened.
"Velrath dies."
"And so may we." The forest grew darker as they walked deeper, the trees twisting unnaturally, their branches forming shapes that almost seemed to move when not directly observed. Shadows flickered across the path, and whispers echoed in the wind, calling her name, tempting her to turn back. Lyria felt the fear coiling around her heart, but she pushed it aside. She had trained her entire life for moments like this. She would not falter. For hours they navigated through the forest, facing trials both physical and psychological. At one point, a sudden chasm opened before them, a yawning gap that seemed impossible to cross. Kale stepped forward without hesitation, extending his hand. "Trust me," he said. Lyria hesitated, every instinct screaming not to reach out. And yet, something in him inspired a fragile trust. She took his hand, and he pulled her across with strength and precision. Once safe, she stepped back, glaring, ashamed that she had trusted him even for a moment. Kale's gaze lingered on her, but he said nothing. As night fell, they made camp in a small clearing. The firelight cast dancing shadows across their faces, and the silence was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Lyria sat with her knees drawn close, watching Kale as he checked the perimeter. His movements were precise, careful, and protective. He was a king, a warrior, and a man whose presence unsettled her more than she cared to admit. "You could have stayed in the castle," she said quietly. "You didn't have to come out here with me." Kale looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "I could not let you face this alone. You are strong, but even the strongest can fall when the curse moves against them. You may hate me, but I will not let you die." Lyria's heart clenched. She wanted to reject him, to tell him she did not need protection, but the truth was undeniable. She had felt the stirrings of the curse, had seen the shadows move, and had known, in the deepest part of her being, that without him she would be lost. The forest around them shifted in ways that were impossible. Branches moved as if guided by unseen hands, and whispers spoke directly into her mind, testing her fears, her memories, and her anger. Lyria clutched her dagger, every sense alert. She realized, with a shiver, that the curse did not only attack the body, it attacked the mind. Kale stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You must focus," he said, voice low but steady. "Fear will make the shadows stronger. Stand firm. I trust your instincts, and me." For a brief moment, Lyria felt the pull of something forbidden, something dangerous, a trust that she had never given willingly before. She shook it off, glaring at him. Do not mistake necessity for trust. I do what I must. Cale's lips curved slightly, almost like a smile, though there was no humor in his eyes. Perhaps, but necessity can be the first step to understanding. As the night deepened, the shadows grew bolder. A form emerged from the darkness, a shape of twisting limbs and glowing eyes. The creature attacked with unnatural speed, its movements fluid and terrifying. Lyria's dagger met its form, striking again and again, but the shadows seemed endless, multiplying with every blow. Kyle moved beside her, his sword slicing through the darkness with precision. Together, they fought, moving in a rhythm neither had practiced, but somehow knew instinctively. Lyria felt a strange exhilaration, the fire of battle mingling with the confusion of emotions she could not name. Hate, anger, fear, and something else. Something that drew her closer to him, even as the shadows threatened to consume them both. Finally, with a powerful strike, Cale drove the creature back into the darkness. It shrieked, a sound that rattled the trees and echoed through the forest, then vanished. Lyria's chest heaved, sweat and blood mingling, her dagger trembling in her hand. Cale stepped closer, examining her briefly before turning to the path ahead. We are not finished, he said. The heart of the woods waits, and it will test you further. You must be ready. Lyria wanted to speak, to tell him she could handle it, that she did not need him. But no words came. Instead, she followed silently, her mind racing with thoughts of the shadows, the curse, and the strange pull she felt toward the man beside her. They traveled deeper into the forest, the air growing thick with ancient magic. Lyria could feel it pressing against her, testing her courage, her resolve, and her heart. She had entered this journey seeking vengeance, but now she realized that vengeance alone would not see her through. She needed strength, wisdom, and perhaps a trust she was not yet willing to admit. At the center of the forest, they arrived at a clearing unlike any Lyria had seen before. The trees formed a natural circle, their branches intertwined overhead, creating a dome of shadow and moonlight. In the center stood a pedestal, and upon it rested a relic, a small crystal pulsing with a faint inner light. This is the heart of the woods, Cale said. The relic can contain the curse, at least for now. But to claim it, you must face your fears, your hatred, and your choices. Only then will its power be yours to wield. Lyria stepped forward, her heart pounding. The shadows in the forest seemed to respond, whispering her name, calling her to strike, to destroy, to give in to her anger. She clenched her dagger, taking a deep breath. She could feel Cale behind her, steady and unwavering, and despite herself, she felt a flicker of reassurance. The shadows surged, forming into the shapes of those she had lost, her family, her home, her past. They reached for her, voices whispering accusations and sorrow. Lyria's heart broke, and yet she stood firm. She remembered Cale's words. Fear will make the shadows stronger. Stand firm. She faced the visions, her dagger raised, and whispered, I will not be broken. I will survive. I will choose my path. A wind swept through the clearing, and the shadows dissolved, leaving only the faint glow of the relic. Lyria reached out, her fingers brushing against it. Power surged through her, a warmth and clarity that filled her from head to toe. She felt the curse's weight, its presence, and yet she felt control. She had faced the test. Cale stepped forward, his gaze steady.
You have done well. Few survive this trial without being consumed.
You have strength, and perhaps a heart capable of more than vengeance. Lyria looked at him, her chest heaving, her hands trembling. Do not mistake this for trust, she said. though her voice lacked the sharpness it had held before. Cale's eyes softened slightly, the first flicker of something unspoken passing between them. I do not, but strength and understanding can lead to trust if one allows it. The night settled around them, the forest quiet and watchful. Lyria had survived, faced the curse, and claimed the relic, but the journey was far from over. She had begun to understand Cale, his burdens, and the forces that threatened Velrath, and though she would never admit it aloud, the fire of curiosity and reluctant admiration for the Alpha King had begun to grow alongside her anger. The shadows had tested her, the forest had judged her, and the relic had chosen her, but the greatest test was still to come, one that would challenge not only her skills and courage, but the very heart she had sworn to protect with vengeance. The kingdom of Velrath trembled beneath a sky of swirling darkness. The curse, once contained within the heart of the woods, had begun to break free. Shadows stretched across the land like living fingers, consuming forests, twisting rivers, and bending the very wind. The castle walls shook under an unseen force, and the people below looked to the sky in fear and awe. Lyria and Cale stood at the edge of the courtyard, the relic from the forest cradled between them. Its faint glow pulsed like a heartbeat, a fragile light against the gathering storm. Lyria's hands were steady, though her chest heaved with exhaustion. Months of struggle, training, and fear had brought her here, yet the final battle loomed closer than ever. We must act quickly, Cale said, his voice carrying authority and urgency. If the curse spreads through Velrath, it will consume everything, every life, every home, every soul. The relic alone cannot hold it indefinitely. We must journey to the Tower of Elders and use the Seal of Light. That is the only way to contain the curse completely. Lyria met his gaze, her eyes sharp and wary. And if we fail? She asked, though a part of her already knew the answer. Then everything dies. Velrath dies.
And the curse claims us both. The journey to the Tower of Elders was perilous.
Shadows surged around them, animated by the curse itself. The ground cracked beneath their feet, and twisted creatures emerged from the darkness, eyes glowing and limbs moving with unnatural speed. Lyria raised her dagger, her instincts honed by years of training and the trials in the forest. Cale moved beside her, a silent force of power and precision. His sword flashed through the shadows, cutting through the darkness as if slicing the very night itself. Together they moved in a rhythm that seemed almost fated, each covering the other, each trusting the other in a way neither would admit aloud. At one point, a massive shadow surged toward Lyria, striking with a force that threw her to the ground. She rolled, narrowly avoiding the crushing blow, and looked up to see Cale holding the shadow at bay with his sword. His dark eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw not the Alpha King, not the enemy she had sought to kill, but a man risking everything for her survival.
Lyria!
He called, his voice carrying over the roar of the storm.
We must move! Now!
She nodded, rising to her feet, and together they pressed onward, the Tower of Elders looming ahead, like a beacon of hope. Its spires stretched into the storm, glowing faintly with ancient magic, untouched by the darkness surrounding it. As they approached the tower, the curse intensified. Shadows swirled around them, forming shapes of those they had lost, of fears long buried, of anger and sorrow that clawed at their hearts. Lyria saw visions of her family, faces twisted in grief, accusing her silently for their deaths. Her heart ached, and for a moment, doubt crept in. Could she save them? Could she save herself? Cale's hand found hers. The contact was brief, almost accidental, yet it carried weight. You are not alone, he said quietly, his voice steady against the storm. We face this together. Her pulse quickened. She wanted to pull away to remind him of the hatred she once held, but she did not. Not now. Not when survival demanded trust, not when the fate of Velrath hung in the balance. She nodded, gripping the relic tightly, and followed him into the tower. Inside, the air was thick with magic. Ancient runes glowed along the walls, pulsing in rhythm with the relic. The seal of light awaited them at the center, a pedestal carved from crystal, its surface etched with symbols older than the first kings of Velrath. Kyle approached the seal, placing the relic upon it. A beam of light shot upward, clashing with the darkness that pressed against the tower from all sides. The shadows screamed, recoiling, twisting, but not yet gone. Lyria stepped forward. "What must I do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Kale looked at her, his dark eyes softening with a rare vulnerability. "You must focus. The seal requires more than magic. It requires heart. You have faced hatred, fear, and loss. You have survived. Now you must will the curse into submission. Your strength, your pain, your choice. They all matter." Her hands hovered over the relic, and she felt its warmth against her palms. The shadows surged, clawing at her mind, tempting her to give in to anger, to strike, to feed the hate she had carried for so long. But she drew in a deep breath, remembering Kale's words, remembering her journey from vengeance to understanding. "I choose," she whispered, her voice carrying over the roar of the storm, "to protect, to survive, to end this." A brilliant light erupted from the relic, pushing back the shadows with a force that shook the tower. Lyria's eyes watered from the intensity, and Kale's hand found hers again, steadying her. Together, they directed the energy, channeling the seal's power with a unity born of struggle and trust. The shadows shrieked, twisting and writhing as they were drawn into the light. Lyria felt the weight of the curse pressing against her mind, testing her resolve. But she did not falter. She focused on the faces of those she loved, on the hope of Velrath, on the man beside her who had become her ally, her protector, and perhaps something more. Finally, with a last surge of energy, the curse was drawn into the seal. The shadows dissipated, the storm lifted, and the air around them became still. The relic glowed softly, its task complete, and the Tower of Elders seemed to exhale, releasing the tension that had gripped it for centuries. Lyria sank to her knees, exhausted, but alive. Kale knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his presence steadying her. "You did it," he said softly. "You saved Velrath." She looked up at him, her chest heaving, and for a moment the hatred she had carried for so long seemed to melt away, replaced by a complicated mix of gratitude, admiration, and something unspoken. We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling. Kale nodded, his gaze holding hers. "Yes, together." For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm had passed, the curse was contained, and Velrath was safe. Yet the journey had changed them both. Lyria had faced vengeance, darkness, and fear, and had survived. Kale had faced the consequences of his rule, the weight of his curse, and the loneliness that came with it. And now, in the quiet aftermath, they stood together, bonded by trials and trust, even if unspoken. As they exited the tower, the first rays of sunlight touched the land. The forests were scarred but alive, the rivers flowed freely, and the people of Velrath looked to the horizon with hope. Lyria breathed in the fresh air, feeling the weight of her journey lift slightly. She had survived, she had fought, and she had learned. Kyle walked beside her, his presence quiet, but commanding. She did not look at him immediately, unsure of the emotions that had begun to stir in her heart. And yet, when she finally met his gaze, there was a mutual understanding, a recognition of the bond forged through danger, darkness, and shared struggle. "You have changed," Kale said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. "So have you," Lyria replied, her voice steady, carrying the truth she could not deny. They paused at the castle gates, overlooking Velrath from the high walls. The kingdom had survived, scarred but strong, and though the curse had been contained, Lyria knew that life would continue to test them, that shadows might return, and that their hearts would carry the marks of the trials they had endured. Kale placed a hand near hers, brushing lightly against her fingers. It was not a declaration, not a claim, but a promise that they had survived together, and that whatever came next, they would face it as allies. Lyria's chest tightened. She had entered the castle seeking vengeance, hatred in her heart, and a dagger at her side. She left with understanding, survival, and something she could not yet name. A connection born of fire, shadow, and the shared weight of their trials. As the sun rose higher, lighting Velrath in gold, Lyria whispered quietly to herself, "I will not forget, but I will move forward." Kael stood beside her, silent but present, and together they looked out over the kingdom, ready to face whatever new challenges the world might bring. The shadows had tested them. The curse had demanded sacrifice. And the Alpha King and the young warrior had survived, not as enemies, but as two souls forever changed by darkness, struggle, and the flickering light of hope. And though the future remained uncertain, the bond between them had been forged, unspoken but unbreakable. And the story of vengeance, trust, and redemption was far from over.